Hello again everyone, and welcome back to Learn Linux TV. In today's video, we're going to take another look at CrowdSec. Now, I've already done a video about CrowdSec, and it wasn't even that long ago, but I wanted to do a more in-depth video because I've been using it for a little while now, and I've learned a little bit more about it, and I felt like I could actually give you guys a more in-depth look at CrowdSec itself, so that's what I'm going to do in today's video. Now, if you haven't seen my previous video, you might not know what CrowdSec is, and that would be a shame because CrowdSec is really awesome. Otherwise, why else would I do a video about it? Especially a second video about it. CrowdSec aims to help protect your Linux servers, but it does it a little bit differently than other solutions. Actually, it's quite a bit different than other solutions because it takes into account what's going on in the wild, and it uses that knowledge to help protect your servers because, well, knowledge is power. More specifically, when you install CrowdSec, it's going to download a block list of known bad actor IPs, so that way your server is protected against those IPs right from the beginning. And having a block list is very awesome because, well, you're protected against known threats. That's really cool, but that's not even the main thing. The main thing is that it takes advantage of knowledge in general. For example, if a CrowdSec user is having their server attacked by a specific IP, then that information is sent upstream so all the other users of CrowdSec are also aware that that attack happened and where it came from. So if one user is being attacked, then all the users of CrowdSec are aware of that attack, where it came from, and it builds the intelligence that it's going to use to help protect your servers. So what I'm going to do in today's video is show you guys two scenarios where I'm going to show you CrowdSec being installed, how it works, and how it protects you in those two scenarios. And by the end of this video, you're going to have a great understanding of how CrowdSec works, how you install it, what the various components are, the command line syntax and things like that. It's going to be awesome. So without any further hesitation, let's dive right in. So here on my laptop, I have this sample web server that I've set up for this video. All it has is the icon for this channel, and then some sample text right here, welcome to the sample NGINX site. Now this web page isn't all that interesting, but it should be good enough to serve as an example. Now, this particular web server is public-facing. It's directly accessible from the internet. And that makes sense because this is a web server and we want people to access our web server, otherwise what's the point? However, anything that is able to reach the public internet can be, well, reached by the public internet, and that's the problem. That's why we need something like CrowdSec so we can help protect this server. So what I'm going to do is switch over to a terminal, which I have right here, and what I'm going to do is just use SSH, and then I'll paste in the IP address. So nothing too unusual here. I'm just going to attempt to SSH into that server. So I'll accept the fingerprint. And now I'm in. As you can see, I'm able to log into my web server, so I do have access to it. So I've just disconnected, and we're going to play through the scenario. So what I'm going to do now is just pretend like I'm not supposed to be able to access this server. It is my server, I have full control over it, but I'm going to play the role of someone who isn't supposed to have access to it. I'm going to try to gain access to it, and we're going to see how CrowdSec responds. Now, as of right now, CrowdSec is not installed on that server. So if I was to try to SSH in again, and I'll just type the wrong password, and again, and again. Permission denied. Well, that's fine. I'll just keep trying. And I just canceled out. You get the point. The thing is, if there's nothing stopping somebody from trying to guess the password, they could just keep trying and trying and trying and trying, and eventually they might even get into the server. That's not what we want. Now what I'm going to do is SSH into that server, and I will actually type in the correct password this time. So let's go ahead and check out the log files and see what's exactly happening because I set this server up yesterday. It's been available on the public internet for a while. So other than my attempts to access the server, there should be attempts from other IPs as well. So what I'll do is go into var log. We have various log files there, and the names of each log file will be different from one distribution to another. But at least in the case of Debian and Ubuntu, we have this log file right here, the auth log. That's the one that we're going to be looking at. So I'm going to cat out the contents, and I do need access to sudo or some sort of root privileges to view this file. That makes sense because there's very sensitive information inside the authorization log. Let's see what's inside. And there's a lot of output here. As a matter of fact, if I pipe this into the WC command for a word count and I use the -L option for the number of lines, we have 13,000 lines inside that file, so it's definitely not a small file. So right away, we can actually see some information about my attempts at accessing the server. If I scroll up a bit, we can actually see that there's quite a few different attempts here, and these aren't all me, I promise. We have some people trying to log in as root, as you can see here. Somebody's trying to log in with a user named master. You can see that right there. So there's definitely a lot of people that are trying to get into this server. We see this username here. I mean, people are trying to get in, and this is common. When you have a server that is open and available to the public internet, people are going to try to get into it. So what I'm going to do right now is just clear the screen. I'll go back to my home directory. So what I'll do next is I'll go ahead and install CrowdSec. And this part of the video is going to be essentially the same as the first video. So I'll consider this somewhat of a review. But what I'm going to do is install CrowdSec, like I mentioned, and we're going to see exactly how that differentiates what's going on or how CrowdSec responds to what's going on. That'll help you understand exactly how to set it up. So what I'm going to do is paste in the very first command. It's a longer command, so of course if I attempt to type it out, I'm going to make a mistake. I'll paste it in right here, and here's the command. In the description below this video, I'll have a link to the blog article for this video, so if you want to copy and paste the commands, you could do that. That way you don't have to worry about pausing the video and writing this all down. All the commands will be there, so you can copy and paste the commands from there if you want to follow along with me. But what this first command is going to do is install the repository. So I'll press enter. It detected my distribution as Ubuntu, which is true. It's installing the required packages, and it's done. And all this does is set up the repository. CrowdSec is not installed, but we do have access to it now. So what I can do is type sudo apt install and then CrowdSec. And if you're running a different distribution, I'll have a link in the blog article for the documentation for CrowdSec. So that way, if you are not using a Debian or Ubuntu-based distro, you'll still be able to get it installed. But at least here on Ubuntu, I have the repository, and I can run this command right here to install the package. Let's go ahead and do it. And now it's installed. The next thing we should do is check and make sure that it's actually running, but not only that, we need to make sure that it's enabled as well. So what I'll do is run sudo and then systemctl. We need to check the status, and we want to check the status of CrowdSec. And as you can see, it's running, and it's also enabled as well. So if that's not the case for whatever reason, what you could do is run this, sudo systemctl, and then enable -- now, and then the name of the service, which of course is CrowdSec. So what this command will do for us is it'll make sure that CrowdSec is enabled. That's why we're using this enable keyword right here. And -- now, what that does is it makes it take effect right now. Meaning if it's not running right now, it'll start it right now. And then going forward, after we enable CrowdSec, it's going to start with the server every time we reboot it. Now on my end, I don't have to run this command because as you just saw, it was already running and it was automatically enabled as well. So on my end, this command right here is completely unnecessary. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually clear the log file for CrowdSec just because I don't want there to be like a bunch of information in there. I just want to see the specific information that pertains to this specific attempt. Now, of course, something else could try to get in, but clearing out the log file is probably a good idea. So what I'll do is run the truncate command with sudo privileges. I'll set the size to 0, and the file that I want to set to 0 is /var/log, and it's crowdsec.log. So now the log file should be completely zeroed out. And what I'm going to do is do a tail follow on that log file. which is now empty. And we should see the attempt right here when I go to try SSH. So at this point, what I'm going to do is attempt to brute force into the server again, just like I did before. I'm going to fail the password. The difference this time is that CrowdSec is now installed, and I want to show you guys exactly how it's going to respond to that. All right, so now that I'm following the CrowdSec log, I'll switch over here to my other tab. So let's go ahead and try to SSH. So I'll press enter. I'm just going to try over and over again. Make sure I get its attention. And take a look at this. We have some information in the CrowdSec log file, as you can see right here, where it shows my IP address is trying to get into the server. It's noticing all of my attempts, and it's actually recommending a 4-hour ban on my IP address, as you can see right here. So CrowdSec clearly noticed the problem. And the reason why it took multiple attempts is because CrowdSec uses a leaky bucket system, so it's not going to ban right away. There's different settings and things like that for how it actually responds to things like this. But I tried SSH over and over again, and it definitely noticed, and it's recommending a 4-hour ban, so that's a good sign. So in the output of the CrowdSec log, it mentioned that there's going to be a 4-hour ban. So what's going to happen when I try to SSH into the server again? Let's find out. So I'll just repeat the SSH command from before. Now try the same thing again. So as you can see, I'm still able to get a password prompt. If I was blocked, I wouldn't even get a password prompt. So that means I'm not blocked. And that makes sense actually. That's by design. Because right here, it's showing a 4-hour ban, but it's recommending a 4-hour ban. It's not actually banning me. But what we're seeing here is that CrowdSec did notice the attempt, is paying attention to it, and the takeaway is that CrowdSec doesn't actually block anything. The job of CrowdSec is to notice that something is happening. It's actually the job of a bouncer to take action, and since we haven't installed a bouncer, then, well, nothing's going to happen. I could try all day long to get into the server, and since there's no bouncer installed, there's actually nothing stopping me from trying to log into the server again and again and again. And if I'm determined enough, I might actually guess the password, I might get into the server. But that's not what we want. We don't want someone to be able to try over and over and over again to get into our server. We want something done about it. So what I'm going to do right now is show you guys the process of installing a bouncer. So what I'm going to do right now is install the package for the bouncer. And this is going to use the same CrowdSec repository that we've already set up. So all I should have to do is run sudo apt install, and then the name of the bouncer package. And the name of the package, in my case, that's appropriate for this server, is CrowdSec Firewall Bouncer IP Tables. Now there's an alternate version as well that utilizes NF tables. Some distributions have switched over to NF tables. In my case, Ubuntu 2004 is still using IP tables, so this is appropriate for me. If you are using a more bleeding edge distribution that's already switched to NF tables, check your documentation to find out. You'll have to install the NF tables version of this same package. But what I'm going to do is just make sure that this is installed. So I'll press enter. And it's installing. And there it is. So the next thing that we should do is check and make sure that it's actually running. And what we could do is run the systemctl status command to check that, but I already know it's running. And the reason why I know that is because I lost my ability to type. I'm pressing a bunch of buttons and nothing's showing up. And the reason for that is because the bouncer has already taken action. So my SSH session right now is completely frozen and useless. I can't type any commands at all whatsoever. And any minute now, it's going to time me out. And the reason for this is because the CrowdSec bouncer that I've installed noticed that CrowdSec itself has noticed attacks coming from a specific IP, mine, and it went ahead and automatically blocked me because CrowdSec's bouncer is going to look at CrowdSec itself. So the bouncer is going to see the history and block my IP. So at this point, I can't access the server anymore. I'm out of the server. So it looks like it's doing its job. So what can we do about this? What if I accidentally locked myself out because I typed the password incorrectly too many times? Even though I'm a legitimate user, it's my server, and it actually is. how exactly would I regain access to the server? Well, there's at least two ways. By default, like I mentioned earlier, the ban is for 4 hours. I could wait 4 hours, and then after that, I should be able to access the server again. But I don't want to wait that long. I have a video to record. I want to show you guys some other things. So I want to unban my IP because I need access to the server. And also, as an aside, it's not just SSH that's being blocked right now. If I was to go back to my web browser, and this is still showing my session from earlier in the video, I'm going to refresh this page, and it's just going to keep trying. It's not going to be able to connect. Even though it was SSH that I used to try to break into the server, it blocked my IP completely. It doesn't matter if I'm trying to SSH into the server or if I'm trying to access the web page that you see right here, it's timing out. You can see this little dot moving right here. It's just not able to access the server. Back in the terminal, what I'm going to do is SSH into another server, and I'm going to use that server to SSH into the web server and unban my IP. So what I'll do is just use SSH yet again, and the IP address for the other server that I've set up is 172.105.10.128. And now I'm into the server. And this server is actually for the second scenario that I'll be showing you guys. But for now, what I'm going to do, like I mentioned, is use this server to go around and connect to the original web server to unban my IP. So I'll use SSH yet again. And now I'm into the web server. So let's take a quick look at the command line syntax for how we can determine what decisions were made and how to reverse a decision. And reversing the decision to block my IP is exactly how I'm going to regain access. So we'll use sudo because we need access to the command line for CrowdSec. And the command to manage CrowdSec is cs-cli or CrowdSec CLI. And what we want to do is take a look at decisions. And we want to get a list of decisions. Now the output is misaligned here, and that's just because I have the font size cranked all the way up. But we can see the information that we need to see. We can see the IP address right here that was blocked, which is mine, so that makes sense. That's why I can't access the server anymore. And we also have an ID number right here. So what I'm going to do is use that ID number to unban my IP, essentially to reverse that decision. So we're going to use the delete keyword, and we want to delete a specific ID. And the ID that we want to delete is this one right here, 710. I'll press enter, and it's telling me that the decision was deleted. And now when we check the decisions list, it's telling us that there's no active decisions at the moment. So if I didn't know any better, I would say that I should be able to access the server again. So let's see if I can. And my session is still frozen from when I was blocked before. So what I'm going to do is just open up another tab. And let's try to use SSH to get back into the web server. So that was 172.105.28.105. And now I'm getting a password prompt. That's a good sign. And I'm in. In fact, it's telling me that I have a problem loading this page, but that was from the previous attempt. And as you can see, it's timed out. But now it works. And that's because I unbanned my IP by deleting the decision to ban my IP. So that's a quick look at how you would unban an IP if for some reason you needed to reverse a decision. That's pretty cool. So what we're going to do now is switch over to another scenario. This one is a little bit more involved than the previous one. So I'm going to type the IP address up here for the server that I need to access. And actually, I have a fully qualified domain name for this server, and it's located at blog.learnlinux.cloud. So I'll press enter. And we have this WordPress site. Now, as you can see, it's an empty WordPress site. There's nothing important here whatsoever, but we're going to assume that it is an important blog. Maybe this is our company's blog. We want to make sure that people are able to access this. So if it were to go down, that's a problem, but it's even worse if it gets compromised. So we definitely want to install CrowdSec on this server right here. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to show you what's different with a WordPress installation. There's a specific bouncer that we need to install, and I'll show you exactly how to install it. So this is going to be fun. Back in my terminal, I will disconnect from the web server. And what I'll do now is connect to the WordPress server. May as well close this tab right here because that one's frozen anyway. And since I have a fully qualified domain name for that blog, I could just type blog.learnlinux.cloud rather than try to remember the IP address. And now I'm in. So what I'm going to do right now is just repeat the process of installing CrowdSec on the blog server. And this process will not be any different than the previous one. It's the same process for installing CrowdSec on the blog server as well. There are some things that are different, and I'll let you know what those things are when we get to that point. But for right now, I'm just going to rerun those installation commands, and then we'll go to the next stage. So we have the bouncer installed and it's enabled, and there's nothing unique about this situation so far. So how does the situation change with WordPress when compared to a normal web server? So what I'm going to do is go back to the web browser, and here's the blog site right here. And I'll go to the special URL to get the login prompt for WordPress, which is right here. So I'll type in the username. And now I'm logged into the WordPress console for this particular website. Now what I want to do is go here to plugins. We want to install a plugin. And then inside the search box, I'm going to type CrowdSec. And here it is. So what it's going to do is that this plugin is going to facilitate communication between the API for CrowdSec and WordPress itself. So that way, if WordPress sees some activity that's not so great, it's able to let CrowdSec know, and CrowdSec can trigger the bouncer to take action. So we're going to install this plugin. And now we're going to activate it. And it's almost ready to go. We now have a CrowdSec section right here on the left-hand side. And what we're going to do is put in the information for the API to ensure that the add-on is able to communicate with CrowdSec. So we're going to copy this right here. The API server by default is listening on port 8080. As an aside, if you have an app that is already using port 8080, you'll have to change the port number to something else in CrowdSec or in that application. I'm not going to go over that. Just want to make sure you guys are aware of that. And next, what we have to do is type in the API key for the bouncer. But how do we actually get the API key? Well, it couldn't be easier because CrowdSec is giving us the command. Literally, it's giving us the command right here. So we don't even have to look it up. That's pretty cool. So I'll start the command with sudo, and then I'll paste in the command that was shown there in the settings page for CrowdSec. So we're going to create a new bouncer. We're going to call it WordPress bouncer. And if this works, it should actually give us an API key. So I'll press enter. And it did exactly that. So this API key, you want to make sure that you don't allow anyone else to see it. If anyone else is able to see it, then you can't trust it. The API key will only be shown a single time. As soon as I close this terminal window, I have no way of retrieving the API key. So what you want to do is record this API key in a very safe and secure location. Again, don't let anyone else see it. This is private information, and everyone is going to get their own API key. So we have the API key right here. Just make sure that it's copied into my clipboard. And what we're going to do is go back here to WordPress, and we'll paste it right here for the bouncer API key. So now that I have everything set up here, another thing that you might want to consider is disabling this option right here. If this is turned on, then CrowdSec is not going to look at your logins to the WordPress admin section, and you probably do want it to monitor that. I mean, that is something that people try to do. So I recommend turning this off, and that should be fine. Now you can play around with the bouncing levels if you'd like to, and there's descriptions here, but we've created the API key, we pasted it in here. We also typed in the API URL. So everything should be good to go. I'll just click Save Changes. And now WordPress should be protected as well. So as you can see, you could use CrowdSec in multiple different scenarios. WordPress is just one of many. But anyway, as far as WordPress is concerned, the settings that I've set up right here should be good enough. So we now have WordPress protected by CrowdSec. So as you can see, CrowdSec is very easy to set up. In the first scenario, we protected a server against an SSH brute force attack. And in the second scenario, I showed you guys how to install the WordPress bouncer that required the API key that we've created. We pasted that into the settings, we configured it, and we should be good to go on that as well. So as you can see, CrowdSec is very flexible. It has various different bouncers that you can install to protect different things, which is really cool. That makes it easy to protect your server. Now, of course, CrowdSec is just one layer of security. It's not something that you can depend on by itself, and that's true regardless of what the technology is. Security is like an onion. There's multiple layers, and CrowdSec definitely gives us a really awesome layer to benefit from, and I highly recommend that you make it part of your security toolbox. Let me know what you think of it in the comments down below. I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. And as always, I will see you in the next video. I have some really cool things coming up, so I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.